It's live now.
Hare Krishna, everyone. So nice to be back and sharing with you today again another new chapter, Canto 2, Chapter 3. This is a very wonderful chapter. And I would like to, before we get into this chapter, I would like to give a little summary of the first two chapters that we covered in Canto 2. Okay. Now this really it really begins in the first canto as to in order to see what's really happening, and that was in chapter 4 when the sages asked Sutta Goswami the happenings that led to the speaking of Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadev Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit. So their question was, they wanted to know what led to the speaking of Srimad Bhagavatam from Shukadev Goswami. What was the story behind it? Now we have to understand that Parikshit Maharaj was a very powerful ruler. And what powerful ruler just renounces everything and goes to the bank of the Ganges, decides to fast unto death? Right? So Parikshit Maharaj, he asked the essential question, what is the recommended activity for one who is about to die? That whatever one is thinking at the time of death, one will take corresponding birth, a next life, a next facility, a next field of activity. So our next body is actually determined by what our consciousness is full of when we leave this body. Now, when he asks the sages, they don't give a definite answer. However, when the exalted sage, Shukadev Goswami appears, all the other sages give the veneration and respect and ask him the question. So, in the first chapter of the second canto, Shukadev Goswami, he glorifies the question. Because who in this world will ask such a question? Namely, what should I think, hear, and do? That thoughtful question shows the mark of an exalted person. Of course, Parikshit Maharaj already knew the answer. All his life, he has been focusing his mind on Krishna and hearing about Krishna. But just to confirm that, he asked this question. So this question was so pleasing to Shukadev Goswami because he would get an opportunity to speak about Krishna. So Parikshit Maharaj was sitting there listening to the glories of Krishna, of Srimad Bhagavatam, in great devotion and love. Shukadev Goswami answers the question by saying that regardless of one's position, whether one is full of desires, without desires, or desires for siddhis, the best thing for him to do was Harinam. So this is the conclusion of all Shastras. Hearing about Krishna, Hari Katha. So this was the first thing that Shukadev Goswami said. But then he also explained, just to encourage Parikshit Maharaj, who was soon to die, that actually there was no use living a long life, living like a tree, hundreds of years in full health. Even if you were to live hundreds of years in full health, and he compares it like to a tree or even a turtle. The turtle has actually a very long life. It's supposed to live hundreds of years. But what are they doing? They're eating flies or whatever, spending their time. But one thing for sure, they're thinking, where am I going to have, wherever I go, I'll take my house with me, right? So Shukadev Goswami is saying, what is the use of such a life? Better to have a short life that is surcharged with meaning, with higher developed consciousness. Some trees actually live for thousands of years, but what is the use? So he's telling Parikshit Maharaj, if you at the end of your life illuminate your consciousness with Krishna consciousness, Then when you leave this world, you will go to that eternal place, Galok Vrindavan. And to encourage him further, he gave the example of Katwanga, King Katwanga, who was, as after he had served the demigods by fighting with the demons on their behalf for a long, long time, the demigods wanted to give him a benediction. And what did he ask? He wanted to know when he would die, because he understood the prime question of life. And when they told him that you only have a moment to live, he immediately got prepared and he went down to the earth planet and focused his mind on Krishna. And Shukadev Goswami is telling Parikshit Maharaj, you don't have to worry. You have 7 full days. So prepare yourself. And then he explained the process, which is basically known as Jnana Yoga, which means detachment from all matter. So the point of detachment is, as one is getting older, why would one want to surround oneself with what is familiar? That's what Shukadev Goswami is saying. One should practice looking at this world, that whatever one sees, he will see it in connection with Krishna, the Virat Rupa. Everything is connected with Krishna. It comes from him. Nothing is separate from him. And everything is rested upon him. Now, there's one thing, and he points out that this Jnana Yoga, the separation of oneself from matter, does not actually deal with Bhagavan, the Supreme Person. So it is an impersonal type of meditation. And this is for the less intelligent beginners to meditate on the impersonal feature, the Virat Rupa, or called the universal form of that. But then gradually one has to rise to a personal contact. So if one goes from seeing Krishna in everywhere, in the different planets, seas, mountains, rivers, birds, beasts, human beings, demigods, everywhere. Right? But we have to see them as parts and parcels of the Lord, of his Virat form. And when one does that, actually what happens is one becomes purified. It's actually a sort of meditation that has to lead to spiritual advancement, to gradual progress. Why? Because it's still a meditation on Krishna, how we see the world as part of his body. Therefore, it is a legitimate process for those who are just beginning and who have the impersonal conception of the world, of Krishna, of God. So Prabhupada points out that without such meditation on God, whether it's personal or impersonal, all good qualities of the human being become covered with misconceptions regarding his constitutional position. And he says, Prabhupada writes in one sentence that without such advanced knowledge, the whole world becomes a hell for human being. Such strong words. In other words, ultimately there's no happiness or peace in this world without some sort of meditation on the Lord. Now, in the second chapter, Shukadev Goswami, after explaining the process of Jnana Yoga, he explains the process of meditation on the Super Soul, the Lord in the heart, and how meditation on the Super Soul should begin from his lotus feet, then move on to the different limbs, and then to his smiling face. Then he explains how the yogi, the Ashtanga yogi, he controls the life airs and moves the soul through the chakras or the energy centers of the body, and eventually just leaves the body as useless. And now he explains this in 2 ways, with 2 types of transcendentalists. One yogi can tour the material universe, like we discussed last time. He can take his astral body, the subtle body, and do many wonderful things. But one who is a devotee, he does not enjoy the world. He can take the yogic process and gradually elevate himself to go through the Shishumara planets and eventually go through the subtle purification and break every connection with matter and himself, and the soul can enter into the spiritual realm. So, after explaining the process of renunciation to ultimately practicing yoga and then to the spiritual world, then at the end of the second chapter, Shukadev describes the conclusion, the goal. What is the best process? So he already does that in the end of second chapter. He explains that in text 33 of chapter 2, where he says that for those who are wandering in the material universe, there's no more auspicious means of deliverance than what is aimed at the direct devotional service of Lord Krishna. So what Shukadev Goswami is saying, that every person at all times, at all places, should hear about, glorify, and remember Krishna. The mind should be full of loving thoughts of Krishna. If our consciousness is filled with petty materialistic desires, some small petty stuff, maybe flying through the air or something, then we will take another body. So that was the answer. Now we come to the chapter today, what we're going to cover. And in the third chapter, which is the pure devotional service, it's called pure devotional service. In text 1, Shukadev Goswami tells Parikshit Maharaj, now I have told you whatever you asked me, namely, what is the duty of a dying man? And in the first one, he explains how thoughtful men, they see that future. And what is the duty of all thoughtful men? What is the duty? In our first slide, we will cover how all thoughtful men take to Krishna consciousness solely at the time of death. What about those who have material desires? Of course, that part is not covered in this verse, in this slide, but that leads to the next one. So if the thoughtful men are taking to Krishna consciousness, what about, which means the pure devotees, but what about those like us who have material desires? So the first shloka, Evam etan nigaditam prishtavan yad bhavan mama nirnamyam mriyamananam manusheshu manishanam. Shukadev Goswami said, Maharaj Parikshit, as you have inquired from me as to the duty of the intelligent man who is on the threshold of death, so I have answered you. And here in the purport, Prabhupada gives the example of great saints who have done this, who have taken shelter of Krishna 24/7. And these are the 6 Goswamis, our great acharyas. Actually, in other religions also, in Christian religion, in Jewish tradition, there are great saints like that who are known as thoughtful men and who have given up everything, very determined. So, but the question is, this is okay for people who are thoughtful, very pure, but what should I do? I have material desires. So what should I do? And Shukadev Goswami, he explains this in the next slide, that even though you may have material desires, you should still focus your mind on Krishna. So in our next slide, Shukadev Goswami gives the indirect, imperfect way of fulfilling material desires, which is going to the demigods. And he names many, it's a very long verse, from verse 2 to 7. And he explains all the different demigods, how one with different material, in different modes of worship. There's different desires of different people. And in order to get success in their particular area, one can go to this particular demigod who's able to fulfill that desire. Why? Because they have considerable influence over that area. Right? And Prabhupada gives the example of how when Ravana went to Lord Shiva, he did such huge sacrifices where he would offer severed heads of other people to please Lord Krishna, and in this way he got he so much power that everyone was afraid of him. Even the demigods were afraid of him, to the point that Lord Ramachandra had to come and kill him. Right now, in this verse, actually, Prabhupada talks about something very interesting, which I thought is an important point, and that how the Vedic system of approaching demigods is better than the modern approach to fulfilling material desires. And this is a very important point, that even though we see that in the Vedic system, they recommend going to these demigods for fulfillment of material desires, but is still better than the modern system of no authority. Of no authority. Why? Because this system of no authority is based on the premise that he would never want to beg or supplicate a superior. Rather, one trusts oneself and satisfies one's desire. So this mood today of just trust yourself, create your own reality, is very, very detrimental. So in the Vedic way, one has material desires, one gets purified by going to a superior authority. But on the other hand, in the modern system, rather than getting purified, one may be very degraded. So therefore, Sutta Goswami is making the point that better you go through this Vedic way. Go to Durga Devi if you desire good fortune, for example, he says. Go to Rudra if you want to become a hero. Like this. If you want stability, you go to Mother Earth. If you want a good wife, you go to Urvashi, like that. If you want to have fame, you have to go to Vishnu. However, Shukadeva Goswami criticizes those who have such desires. He's a pure devotee. He's not going to bewilder people by taking shelter of different the flowery language of the Vedas. So Shukadeva Goswami criticizes those who have such desires. He says that if one has these things, the real problems of life will not be solved. The real problem of life is going to be that we are going to die. This material body is doomed. No matter how healthy, wealthy we are, we will die. That is the basic problem. And therefore, in this verse, he says the manishi, the thoughtful man, does not get involved in the earlier verse, in the first verse. He said, does not get involved in fulfilling these desires, but rather he focuses his mind on the real problem. So what is Shukadeva Goswami doing then, explaining all this? He's simply describing the Vedic system. Just like he described the Jnana Yoga system in the first chapter, he's describing the Vedic system. In other words, for the beginners who have a hard time accepting God as a person, he should see all matter in relationship with the Lord. Here, he's explaining what should the karmis do. But in the next slide, verse 10 and 11, he's giving the conclusion. And what is that conclusion? Whether we have material desires or none, better we approach Krishna only. Why? So akama means one who has no desires, which basically means a devotee. So no desires means actually Krishna's desires, to please Krishna. So that's akama bhakta. But if one desires liberation, one practices Jnana Yoga, people say, right? No, actually, according to Shukadeva Goswami, he should still practice Bhakti Yoga and worship the Supreme Lord. The karmis or the sakam bhaktas are not very intelligent because they are those type of people who work very hard, and they're described as mudhas. Why? Because they're working very hard for the purpose of sense gratification. They're thinking, I will work hard so I can enjoy. But human life is not meant for that. Prabhupada actually writes that such karmi muras, they may become eventually Mayavadis because they're thinking, I'm working so hard, but still I did not get peace. So the world must be false, right? So all their effort of the Mayavadis is to actually make God dead, Prabhupada writes, impersonal. The yogis, they just want to have some mystic perfections. They want to walk on water and do some magic, he says. And Prabhupada writes in this purport that this implies that bhakti yoga may be perfectly administered without any mixture of karma and jnana. As the unmixed sun ray is very forceful and therefore called tivra, similarly, unmixed bhakti yoga of hearing, chanting, etc., may be performed by one and all, regardless of inner motive. So, in our next slide, Shanaka Rishi. Now, who's Shanaka Rishi? He's the head of all the thousands of sages. Now, he may be one of the sage, but actually, he's not an ordinary sage. He's a very realized, self-realized soul. And he wants to hear, and we've heard him as very, in the earlier chapter in first canto also, we've seen him as very inspired. And he gives his realizations sometimes in a very, very strong way. So Shanaka Rishi, now he wants to hear more about Krishna and his pure devotees, Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadev Goswami. Who are these people? He's asking. Who are so exemplary, who have left, like Parikshit Maharaj has left his kingdom, everything, his family, and sitting at the bank of the Ganges, waiting to die. And Shukadev Goswami, such a powerful speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam, who absolutely has renounced everything. He wants to know about them. So in text 15, he's going to talk about Parikshit Maharaj, why he's so exemplary. And in text 16, he talks about Shukadev Goswami. So a little bit of the verse. Yeah, I'll read text 15 and 16. Maharaj Parikshit, the grandson of the Pandavas, was from his very childhood a great devotee of the Lord. Even while playing with dolls, he used to worship Lord Krishna by imitating the worship of his family deity. Now, these two verses are very relevant to our children, to see these examples of these acharyas and how similar they are. Their lives are very, very similar. And the one similarity, among other similarities, is that their childhood has been immersed in love of Krishna. And they have worshipped dolls as though Krishna dolls by imitating the worship of their family deity. And so for Maharaj Parikshit, Prabhupada writes how Maharaj Parikshit, according to Jiva Goswami, Maharaj Parikshit must have heard about the childhood pastimes of Lord Krishna at Vrindavan, for he used to imitate the pastimes with his young playmates. According to Sridhar Swami, Maharaj Parikshit used to imitate the worship of the family deity by elderly members. Prabhupada writes that this is the best way to train children, is that they simply imitate the elders, in the family as well as where in the temple. In other words, they should have good examples. And if they simply imitate them, their training is done. Because at that, imitation is a very powerful process for children to learn. They need good role models. So this we see here, how Maharaj Parikshit is doing that. Now in text 16, Shukadev Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, was also full in transcendental knowledge and was a great devotee of Lord Krishna, son of Vasudeva. So there must have been discussion of Lord Krishna, who is glorified by great philosophers and in the company of great devotees. So here Prabhupada writes in the purport how both Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadev Goswami were on the same level. But look at their backgrounds. Maharaj Parikshit has been a worldly king, very much immersed in worldly things. And who is Shukadev Goswami? He was a typical renouncer of the world, Prabhupada writes, so much so that he did not even put cloth on his body. Superficially, Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadeva Goswami might seem to be opposites, but basically they were both unalloyed, pure devotees of the Lord. And when such devotees are assembled together, there can be no topics save discussions of the glories of the Lord, of Bhakti Yoga. And then Prabhupada in the purport writes about his own experience, about how his father used to celebrate all the festivals and how he was given a set of deities by his father because he wanted to imitate his father. His father would come home quite late after closing the shop. He had a cloth shop. And then when he would come home, he would worship the deities and put them to rest. And so he saw it and he wanted to imitate him. And so his father gave him a set of deities. Then Prabhupada talks about Mirabai, who was also born in a great Vaishnava family. So all these lives of these great souls are very similar. Another point to think about is that how Parikshit Maharaj, when he was born, it was close to when Krishna disappeared. And therefore, there was a lot of discussion about Krishna because Krishna had just left. So everybody was full with Krishna. So how today, we have the association of Prabhupada disciples who are able to tell us directly about Prabhupada because they've been with him and spent time with him. But just imagine 100 years from now, we won't have that facility. We won't be able to meet anyone who had seen such an exalted personality as Srila Prabhupada. So this is very special when we have people who have met and been and heard from, face to face from such personalities. So in the same way, Parikshit Maharaj was very fortunate because he was alive at that time when Krishna had just left. So everybody was talking about Krishna. And so remembering Krishna brought him great ecstasy. So this was Parikshit Maharaj's position. So Shanaka Rishi wants to hear about these great devotees. But in the remainder of the chapter, however, he criticizes those who waste their lives not hearing about Krishna. Why? Because human life is a chance for the eternal soul to regain his lost position. Now it seems like heavy criticism, but in a way is glorifying Krishna. By criticizing these people who are forgetting Krishna is another way of glorifying Krishna Katha. We have to remember that he's a sage. He's a self-realized sage. And he's seeing how wonderful Krishna is. So in text 17, he talks about how people who spend their days and he talks about how by the rising and setting of the sun, we're losing our duration of life, except those who are using their time discussing topics of Krishna. So that leads to our next slide, that how Shanaka Rishi explains how human life is not meant for gratifying senses, just like the animals, trees, or birds, because they have better facilities for gratifying their senses. So obviously, human life is not meant for that purpose, which is covered in text 18. He says, do the trees not live? Do the bellows of the blacksmith not breathe? All around us, do the beasts not eat and discharge semen? So he's saying, what is the difference between trees and ourselves? The trees, like I explained earlier, live for thousands of years. So if our purpose of life is simply to extend our lives, the trees can outdo us, right? If our purpose is to just simply breathe, he says, do the bellows of blacksmith not breathe? And Prabhupada mentions how there's trees that live for 7,000 years. They've seen Krishna, So in other words, nobody can compare with longevity, nobody can compare with trees in terms of longevity. So all species of life, they're breathing, eating, mating, you know. So what is our credit if we're just simply doing that? The purpose of life, in other words, is not to simply extend our life and live longer. Life, he says, is meant for tapasya. So all this advancement is simply to extend our life. And then he also mentions about certain birds, like the vulture. Prabhupada says how they can fly so high and they have eyes that can see for miles. But what are those eyes seeing? They're looking out for a dead body to eat. So having good facilities in the human body is not the purpose of life. If you're doing all the wrong things, we cannot compete with these lower species. But the difference is that the animals cannot become Krishna consciousness, Krishna conscious. So Shanaka Rishi is speaking very harshly. Basically, he's saying that if humans are not pursuing self-realization, then they're worse than beasts. But generally, people don't think like that, right? They actually glorify such people, he says. So the next verse leads to our next slide, where Shanaka Rishi compares materialistic people to dogs, hogs, camels, and asses, which is covered in verse 19. Men who are like dogs, hogs, camels, and asses. Praise those men who never listen to the transcendental pastimes of Lord Shri Krishna, the deliverer from all evils. And then he goes on, Prabhupada explains in the purport the nature, why the people are compared to these four things, right? So, and then he says that how people who are in this category, they praise people who are also like that, but they are simply bigger animals. Now, why are these four animals selected? He explains that a dog is quite useless, he says, unless he has a master. Otherwise, his life is actually very precarious. And he explains how, and he compares that to education. It may be very advanced, but this education is simply creating dog-like mentality, because even after getting so many degrees, one is still going from door to door looking for a job. And then Prabhupada writes something very interesting. He compares the Vedic culture, where the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, especially the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, they were very independent because they would not accept any service from anybody. They were independent. So, and then he explains how the war of Kurukshetra happened. Why did it happen? Because the Kurus took away the whole kingdom from the Pandavas. But because they were Kshatriyas, how would they live? The Kshatriyas must have some land to live off. They will not accept a service from anybody, a salaried job. Right? And the Brahmanas, they were devotees and they taught others how to become devotees. So in this way, and then also the example of the Goswamis were there, how they were high-class Brahmanas, and then when they accepted service from the Muslims, they were actually rejected. Because, why? Because a Brahman will never accept service, especially from a lower class person. So in this way, he explains very nicely that how a Brahman will starve, but will never accept another service. And what they used to do, if they had problems surviving, they would pick up the grains left over after harvesting, but he would never beg for food or accept service from anyone. Prabhupada gives the story of a Brahman who was very, very poor. He was very rigid in his habits and he was very poor. And so a big zamindar, he heard about that and he came to him and said, look, I want to help you. And the Brahmin said, no, I don't need help from you. My students, they take some alms of rice and mix it with tamarind juice. That is good enough for me. And Prabhupada writes how in the modern civilization, this dependence is there. We need jobs, we depend on machines. So this he calls a doggish mentality. Then he compares such people, materialistic people, to hogs because the hog is non-discriminating. He'll eat anything. Then he compares them to camels who eat thorns. And as he eats those thorns, he's cut by the sharp thorns and he bleeds inside. And he thinks, and he's eating his own blood. In this way, it's shortening his life. And then he compares materialistic people to donkeys who work very, very hard. They carry, especially in India, we see that, they carry this big weight, many, many bricks, and the master even rides on it, right? Just to get some food. So in the same way, the karmis work very hard for their families who give them no appreciation. There's a story about Valmiki who used to rob people, as we know that he was a dacoit at one time, and then he became such a great author. Then Narad Muni once told him that you are robbing others for committing so many sinful activities. But what are they going to do? In other words, you're robbing for your family, but are they going to help you when you're in trouble, when you go to hell? Of course, initially he didn't believe it. But then one time he was in big trouble, some potion or something knocked him out. And he asked, his family, and they refused to help him. So in this way, he changed. He gave up his bad habits and became totally transformed. So in this way, Shanaka Rishi is criticizing such people. Now, in the next slide, he's criticizing those who do not hear about Krishna. They possess ear holes where snakes live. Their speaking is like the croaking of a frog. So he says in text 20, one who has not listened to the messages about the prowess and marvelous acts of the personality of Godhead and has not sung or chanted loudly the worthy songs about the Lord is to be considered to possess ear holes like the holes of snakes and tongue like the tongue of a frog. So in other words, one who does not hear about the Lord, or one who does not hear or speak about the Lord, is supposed to possess ear holes of a snake, which means that Prabhupada explains how the mice in an agricultural field, they make these holes. So on an typical agricultural field, you see these holes. They're made by the mice. And what do? They store grains in there. And the snake goes into that hole and eats up the mice and lives there comfortably. So that's why people who don't hear prowess about the Lord, then they are compared. The ear holes are compared to the holes of the snakes, where the snakes live. The tongue of the frog, people who don't speak about Krishna, they're compared to the tongue of the frog. And we know that example where Prabhupada gives that when a frog croaks, he simply invites the snake. He says, come, eat me. I'm here. And of course, Prabhupada writes wonderful. These are wonderful, wonderful purports where Prabhupada explains these things. And he brings it to modern day problems, where people are hearing and speaking all types of nonsense things, mundane news of the world. And how people should be taught to hear transcendental topics, especially those of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So in the next slide, Shanaka Rishi, condemns people who don't bow down before the Lord, who don't use the head to bow down before the Lord, which becomes a heavy burden, especially people who are very powerful and very rich. So he says in text 21, the upper portion of the body, though crowned with a silk turban, is only a heavy burden if not bow down before the personality of Godhead, who can award mukti, freedom. And the hands, all those decorated with glittering bangles, are like those of a dead man if not engaged in the service of the personality of Godhead, Hari. Especially somebody who's very, very powerful, like the king or a strong leader. That head especially has to bow down before the Lord. Otherwise, that turban, the symbolic turban, will sink that person, right? Imagine if somebody had a very heavy turban with full of jewels and he were to be in the water, what's going to happen is he's going to drown. So this is very, very strong condemnation by Shanaka Rishi. So, and then he criticizes those who don't use their hands to serve the Lord in Krishna's service. Then those hands will also sink us. In other words, if we just simply don't, even our wealth, if we don't use it for Krishna's service, is going to sink us. It just means that we are proud. When we become proud, then we refuse to understand how Krishna is so superior to us. And Prabhupada writes in the purport how rich people should visit regularly the Vishnu temple. And he gives the example of many famous families who make it a point to construct temples, Vishnu temples, to encourage the common people to come and bow down, right? And of course, the Goswamis also did that. In other words, all our strength, everything should be not based on knowledge that it is our power, but rather it all belongs to Krishna. So in the next slide, Shanaka Rishi criticizes eyes that do not see the Lord. They're like those printed on peacocks, and legs are like tree trunks. That's a very wonderful way of describing, because the eyes on the plumes that are printed on the plumes of the peacocks, they are just simply symbolic representations. They are not real eyes. You can't see from those eyes, right? So he's condemning all these tendencies. They're bitter pills, of medicine, but they're healthy for us. Why? Because we are reminded that every part of our body has to be used to glorify Krishna. The purpose of our eyes to develop intense love for Krishna by seeing the deity of the Lord, by seeing the beauty of the Lord. And when we are attracted to the beauty of Krishna, then you will be detached from all mundane beauty. In the same way, the legs that do not go to the holy places or visit temples, they're like compared to like tree trunks. The tree trunks look like legs, but they don't move. So in this way, Prabhupada very powerfully explains that in the purport, that people should visit holy places as much as what is possible, and there they should go and see the profusely decorated forms of the Lord in a sanctified atmosphere. And in the next slide, Shanaka Rishi criticizes those who have not received shelter of a pure devotee and training from a pure devotee is like a dead man. And that's very, very important. In other words, ultimately, one has to take shelter of an exalted Vaishnava and training from such a person. In other words, what does it mean to take the dust off the feet? It's the lowest part of the body. That is what is considered dirt. In other words, means accepting the service of a pure devotee. And one who has not had that type of training of giving service to the pure devotee cannot move towards God. And so therefore, Shanaka Rishi is saying that he has wasted his life. And so therefore, he's like a dead man. And Prabhupada very wonderfully explains in the purport the importance of taking shelter of such of pure devotees. And he gives the example of Srimati Radharani. In such a beautiful way, Prabhupada explains how she is the tender-hearted, feminine counterpart of the Supreme Whole, resembling the perfectional stage of the worldly feminine nature. Therefore, the mercy of Radharani is available very readily to the sincere devotees. And once she recommends such a devotee to Lord Krishna, the Lord at once accepts that devotee's admittance into his association. And in the next slide, Shanaka Rishi criticizes those who are chanting, but the tears don't come, which means their heart is steel framed. We need to soften that heart through the process of chanting. So then this is the goal of Krishna consciousness, to actually have tears falling down when we chant the holy name. We are not there at all. But that is the goal of Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada says, is to feel the heart melting and the tears coming out. So in this way, Shanaka Rishi concludes in the last verse, O Sutta Goswami, your words are pleasing to our minds. Please, therefore, explain this to us as it was spoken by the great devotee Shukadeva Goswami, who is very expert in transcendental knowledge and who spoke to Maharaj Parikshit upon being asked. So I conclude with my presentation here, and I will give it over to Rati Preshta Mataji to give her part of this,
Thank you so much.
Of the guidebook. Yes.
Now I will just share the screen for guidebook. So the story summary, as we always know, it is very interactive form and it, in a very narrative style. The sages sitting in Naimisharanya were in awe upon hearing the great sage Sutta retell the transcendental conversation between Parikshit Maharaj and Sukdev Goswami. Sutta described how the sages gathered on the banks of the river Ganges were eagerly listening to the wise answers of the great sage Shukadeva to King Parikshit. So there you have it, concluded Sukdeva Goswami. You asked what a dying person should do, and I have answered you. You see, it depends on what people desire. And it continues like this in a very interactive format. And it also have certain drawings for children of lower age group. They can color these drawings, and the elder ones while they are engaged in reading and listening the translations. Then there are key messages, which again is a wonderful way to help children memorize the important messages in the entire chapter and how they can apply those messages in their lives. Particularly in this chapter, I found it very relevant because getting them all together here, and then the activities were also so meaning application based that entire chapter is summarized and memorized by children so well. And then understanding the story questions, wherein there are multiple choice questions. Again, a very wonderful way to summarize the entire chapter summary in the form of mental map when children are actively engaged in answering these questions. Then there are higher order thinking questions. I always make a note of these questions before reading translations with children, and then it is very wonderful how children actually reflect on these questions, and when we discuss, they ask questions, they reflect, they go deep into the philosophy, which is again a very very wonderful way to engage children in the philosophical discussions. And then there are activities, beginning with critical thinking activities. First one is using the media to teach Krishna consciousness. So here children can think of various ways how they can actually approach media while preaching in an attempt to preach. Maybe meaning they can prepare a speech, or they can prepare a speech for a radio or a TV or a news channel. Maybe they can approach some news channel, or various ways they can be explored. And then there is an announcement activity wherein children have to create an advertisement called Back to Godhead. So this is done by both my daughters. They have somehow tried to use the paint and brush for, meaning they used to play on this, but this is the first time when they did something very wonderful. So Back to Godhead, they have depicted various ways where, like chanting holy name, eating delicious prasadam, and reading Srimad Bhagavatam. They have given some pictorial representations also, and how, meaning an attractive way to attract people through advertisements can be this. Elder children can do even, meaning I'm sure quite a better job on this. And these advertisements can be made by children. They can also, the younger one can also do with paper and pen. So that is also an idea. Basically, the idea is to help children meditate and create something for preaching, meaning the within their mind they will have ideas to preach like this. And then there are artistic activities wherein they have to make a kind of megaphone, and then that megaphone can be used for preaching messages, and children can, in a fun way, they can preach some messages to others and to family members maybe in the beginning. So they have to cut a circle and make a cone shape out of that circle and decorate it with glitters and stickers. So this is another artistic activity. And then there are introspective activities. This is a very wonderful way to help children actually understand the instructions and apply them in their lives. So these are just tally marks. Children have to tick them every day. And once they do it on a regular basis and they tick them like this Sunday, Monday, every day wise, so they will be more conscious then to apply them in their daily lives. Even after this week, meaning the week goes off, they will be conscious that, have I heard anything about Krishna today? Have we discussed topics about the Lord? Have we sung? Have we seen the deity? So now my daughter always say, Mama, online, we'll have online darshans. So she makes sure that she has darshans every day, even though we are not able to go to temple now because of COVID crisis. So then there are writing activities. So get the words right here again. These are some wonderful writing activities wherein actually children are, it is such a creative way to, we are using the philosophy of Srimad Bhagavatam, and it is helping children for linguistic development. So unscramble the words, and then sequencing of activity, sequencing of the entire story. So there are these 14 meaning sequences which are arranged, which are not arranged in a proper order. So children have to first read them and then arrange them in a proper order. It may require some children to go to the story back again and then read the story, reread it, and then maybe try this, attempt this, because there are so many sequences that are happening, meaning comparing eyes, comparing snakes, the ear holes, all those activities. Children may not remember the sequence just by once hearing the story. So they may want to go back and read the story again and then do this activity. Maybe it can be seen as per the capacity and age of the children. And then there are also word search as per the age of the children. Younger children can do a simpler activity of word search, and there is another word search for older kids. And then there is a crossword wherein children have to locate for these words across and down. Then theater activities, very wonderful. My daughters thoroughly enjoyed this activity. Entire day they were busy playing this. So I cut all these handouts, and then we made small cards, and I gave, for every cutout they were given extra slip, meaning another plain sheet on which they had to draw. So one of them, I put them all in, I folded the slips and put them in a box, and one, when the slip was taken out, then they used to read. But if one child will read and another child will, the one who has read will first draw the image of what he or she has read, and then the other child will guess. They will also act. So my daughters were acting as a mimicry. I have shown two of them in this next slide. So one was like, one who has not sung or chanted the songs of the Lord possesses a tongue like that of a frog. So this is what she drew, and this is how she acted, and the other one has to guess. So like this. And then this both by I have just shown two so that we can we can have an idea, and we can all of them, these can be done in a very wonderful and play manner. Children enjoy all these theater activities a lot. Both by rising and by setting, the sun decreases the duration of life of everyone except one who utilizes the time by discussing the topics of the Lord. So this is showing how sun and then the life is happening. This is how. Like this, children can be engaged in a wonderful way of engaging children in such activities. Then there is this God store, wherein children have to imagine that they work at the God store, and they have to, again, a way of teaching. They have to show to new people around them how who have no prior knowledge about worshiping gods. Describe to them briefly about different gods and demigods, and as per their desires, they have to worship different demigods, and then they have to recommend an overall picture. So here she did. Short.
Welcome to God's store. Here you can find many demigods and goddesses. He is Varuna. If you want good bank balance, so you can worship this, take this. She is Mother Earth. If you want powerful body, so you can take this and worship this. He is the moon. If you want to enjoy the senses, you can take this. But if you want to not be materially happy and want to be spiritually happy, so you can take this. He is Krishna.
So like this, this is another way of helping children, actively do various activities and be engaged in the philosophy of Srimad Bhagavatam. Then sing along. This is a very beautiful poem. 5 little nosy frogs croaked too much on their logs, speaking a little prajalpa. Oh, oh, along came a hungry snake. Then it became too late. Now there are 4 big curious frog. Glug, glug. So like this one, the snake is coming again and again and eating one of them, and then it continues like this. So this is another way of fun way of singing a song and getting to know the philosophy. Then take the statements. They have to identify whether it is true or false and mark accordingly.
Well,
these are more deeper linguistic activities wherein children have to identify the part of the speech, and first an example is given of each kind: noun, pronoun, verb, adjective, and adverb, and then children have to underline nouns and pronouns, then verb in these 3 sentences, then adjective in these 3 sentences, adverb. So children can go deep into the linguistic skills are being developed like this. By giving live examples, they will read, or every time they will read these lines of Srimad Bhagavatam, it will go deep and deep into their hearts, and it will sink deeper, remain with them. So they will, this is a fantastic way to understand, help children memorize the philosophy again by reading these statements again and again. And then these are keywords, wherein children have to identify the part of the speech again, define it, and write the synonym and antonym for it. Then again, match the following exercise. Children have to match various demigods and goddesses with corresponding material desires. So again, a very fun way of summarizing these various shlokas which we have heard in Srimad Bhagavatam, this chapter. Then in service of Krishna, there are these 4 items which are given. Children have to draw, meaning it pictorially, and then they have to describe with few words. So how silk turban can be used, how sari can be used, how hands can be used, and how eyes can be used in service of Krishna. So these are our some explanations given by my daughter. I'm sorry, I don't have much. I am sharing only my daughter's samples for this, because we have not reached to this chapter in our Sunday school. So whatever activities I am doing with my daughters, I am happy to share with everybody there. Then there is then they have to write a story about someone who know at least 3 of these items which have been used in previous slides. So they have to write a story beginning with a small narration wherein they can remember what has happened. So this was an incident which happened actually 4 or 5 years back. But I was surprised when my daughter wrote this, that she could remember all the details of what color dress the girl was wearing and everything very, very, meaning she could remember all these details. It was a surprise to me also. So she writes, one Wednesday, I met a girl, Krishna Kumari, at my aunt's house in Vrindavan. She was 11 years old and was wearing a green color gopi dress. She was decorating Krishna with a turban. Then she decorated Krishna with paint and offered flowers to him with her hands. Thereafter, she did aarti. I was seeing all this with my eyes wide open. All this had a very deep impact on me. I still remember Krishna Kumari Didi and thanked her from my heart. So this is her way of expressing gratitude after many years of this incident. And then there are the answers, understanding the story, get the words right, sequencing also, all the answers are given so that children can later tally. And then crosswords, parts of speech detective also. And then these keywords with definition, synonym, and so that was it. And these books can be bought in India from Golden Age Media. With this, the number is also shared, and in US via Amazon. That's all. Thank you all very much. Now we will open the session for questions. I will change the settings so that you all can unmute yourself and ask questions. Yeah, you can raise your hands, those of you. Yes, Jyoti Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you both of you all for wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Mataji, my daughter was asking this question, that if Brahma is mortal, then how come in his anger Lord Shiva appeared, and who is like sort of immortal? Because she's giving the reason also that he has given immortality to Markandeya Rishi.
Mm-hmm.
So that thing was like, how come from a mortal person this immortal personality is appearing?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, in some places, Prabhupada explains that Brahma, after his 100 years are over, he goes to the spiritual world, So in that sense, he is immortal. But in some places, I've read how even Brahma has to die, in other words, he has to die. So there's immortality can be understood in several ways, that Lord Brahma is not an ordinary living being. One gets the position of Brahma after one has done pious activities for like thousands and thousands of years. So in that sense, he's immortal. But Brahma definitely, after his life is finished, he goes to the spiritual world. So we can say, and his lifespan is so big, then in one way we can say that he is immortal. He is immortal. And from Brahma is coming Lord Shiva, right? And Lord Shiva has a higher position than even Brahma. Actually, Lord Shiva is higher than Brahma. Brahma is a jiva, a very empowered jiva. And Lord Shiva is not a jiva, really. He's in between Vishnu, and jiva. And Prabhupada explains like the difference between yogurt and milk. They're basically the same. They're coming, but the source is milk. So milk is Vishnu. The source of Shiva, Lord Shiva, is Vishnu. So ultimately, he's not Vishnu Tattva. But so his source is Vishnu, but at the same time, yogurt is not very different from milk. It's the same element there, right? So, so in this way, Lord Shiva is definitely higher than Brahma. So how is he coming out from Brahma? Well, this is the way Lord Shiva is representing the mode of ignorance. For destruction purposes, when we destroy, we are in the mode of ignorance. We can't destroy something without coming to that mode. So, and he's in charge of that mode, because he destroys ultimately, at the end, right? So so therefore he's in some way or the other, he's affected by that mode, but that doesn't mean he is in the mode of ignorance. Just like Lord Brahma, has to be in the mode of passion. He has to, in order to have the creative potency, he needs to be in the mode of passion. He needs to be use the mode of passion, use it for creation. And sometimes we see that he is overcome by that mode, of passion. But that doesn't in any way lessen that person's position. Just like somebody very, very powerful, if he does make a fault, a mistake, he's not to be condemned. He's not to be condemned. Why? Because he's just very powerful. So in the same way, we see Brahma sometimes being overcome by certain lower modes, but he's not to be condemned. Okay. So in one way, we can say he's got 100 years to live, but in another way, we can say he's immortal, because he's very, very powerful personality. And many times we hear that how Lord Brahma, for example, in the 10th canto, it's mentioned how he prayed after the Brahma Vimohan Leela. When he realized his foolishness, he was feeling so bad, he was feeling so regretful, that he prayed to the Lord that give me a birth by which I can, just be a very menial, humble servant, a position which is so low degraded, right? So he was born as Haridas Thakur, which was not a low position, but except his birth was from a Muslim family, right? So Brahma took birth as Haridas Thakur in order to understand, he was regret for his pride, Now, Haridas Thakur was such a powerful devotee of the Lord. He wasn't an ordinary person, right? So people like that, when they make a mistake, it's really orchestrated by Krishna himself for the purpose of teaching us, okay? So Brahma is immortal. Brahma is a powerful personality, but Lord Shiva, coming from him, is actually a more powerful person, than even Brahma. And that can happen for the purpose of Leela, because he's been designated ultimately as the creator, as a secondary creator. So everything is coming from him except Vishnu.
Yes, Mataji. Yes, Mataji. Mataji, there is recently I was seeing this Ahilya Bai Holkar. So she's also a great devotee of Lord Shiva, and she's also running the kingdom as considering that it is the property of Lord. All devotional qualities are there, but only she is a devotee of Lord Shiva. So what is the difference? Milk and curd we understand, but do the followers, those who are following Lord Shiva with no material desire, do they also go back to Godhead?
Well, yes, if they are worshipping Lord Shiva as the great Vaishnav, if they have the proper consciousness, yes. Even the gopis went to Mother Durga, Katyani, which is another form of Mother Durga, to get Krishna as their husband. So in other words, their mood was, I am praying to you because I want Krishna as my husband. So ultimately, if their consciousness, they understand that Krishna is the Supreme Lord, then that's not a problem. It's not a problem. We're just reading in one class about King Bharat. He was such a great king. After Lord Rishabdev, he was the eldest son of Lord Rishabdev, and after whom the whole Bharatvarsha is named, King Bharat, who became a deer, that story. And so as a king, he was doing all these ritualistic ceremonies. He had to, as a king, and these ceremonies involved, pleasing the demigods, offering different things to the demigods. And so nicely it explained, Prabhupada explains how his consciousness was very focused. He knew that all these demigods are different, nothing but different limbs of the Lord. So that when we are offering these these offerings to the demigods is actually going to Krishna. Because he clearly saw them as different limbs of the Lord. And in this way, and Prabhupada writes in the purpose, such personalities are not to be criticized, even though they're using karma kanda, because their consciousness is very clear. The problem today, Jyoti, is that their consciousness is not clear. They're worshiping Lord Shiva for the purpose of getting material favors. You see, that is the problem. And that is why demigod worship is not recommended. And Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita, they are people of lower intelligence. However, we are not to disturb them. We cannot disturb them. Because like I mentioned in the class, going to a superior authority is way better than trying to fulfill material desires on one's own whims without accepting a superior authority. So that's why we don't disturb them. Okay?
Yes, Mataji, I have made some Narsimhadev masks since it's a children's, for children. Should I show you all, Mataji?
Yes, show everybody. Yes, it'll be so wonderful. Wow, amazing. Such a nice for Lord Nrsimha's appearance day. Wonderful. Okay, nice. Wow, this is amazing. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Jyoti. This was so nice that you did take the trouble to share with all of us. This is beautiful. Are they going to be in a drama?
Not really, Mataji, just art and craft. Yeah, you can make masks. You can just put strings over here. And
you can use it. Yeah, you can use it for drama. This is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. This was wonderful. Hare Krishna.
Anybody else would like to ask questions?
Hare Krishna Mataji, Pranam, Sakshi here. I have actually question, just general question about Srimad Bhagavatam. So can I ask?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Mataji, actually, I have question like whenever we read Srimad Bhagavatam, we come to know like these are the questions. There are some questions which sages asked from the Sutta Goswami, and then there were some questions which Parikshit Maharaj asked from the Sukdev Goswami. But actually, when Vyasdev was compiling the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he was telling to his son, Sukdev Goswami, then were those questions were there at that time? Or means I was not able to link that, Mataji, actually.
Yeah.
So those means they later on they asked, and then they were in the Bhagavatam. So how is it, Mataji?
Yeah, I mean, in other words, Vyasadev, Shukadev Goswami was leaving as soon as he was born after 16 years. And I believe he was attracted back by hearing the verses of Putana and, how Krishna made Putana a mother in the spiritual world. And that, and a few other verses. So his heart became attracted. So this is how Shukadev, I don't know any more details regarding that, how in terms of how to synchronize that. I actually cannot answer that question really.
Okay, Mataji. It's fine,
Mataji. The way we understand Srimad Bhagavatam, we cannot understand it in this way, which came before and which came after. Actually, Srimad Bhagavatam is not a chronological history of the Vedic times. They select different sections, different things and people and pure devotees that are helpful for advancement in spiritual life. So it's not a chronological type thing. It's timeless. So what came before and what came after is just it's not really that relevant. Okay.
Okay, Mataji. Okay, thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Archana Mataji, you can ask now, please.
Hi Krishna Mataji. Thank you for the wonderful class. So Mataji, my question would be, so we know that children imitate whatever the parents do, and then we need to be good role models. So although we try, sometimes, we kind of, it's also a scary reality sometimes that when and they also imitate things that we subconsciously do, or they also imitate the emotions, the underlying emotions. So how do we ground ourselves? Like, how do we even if we just sometimes miss those things? I kind of have this fear that yeah, she might just look upon me as a role model because I don't want to be because I don't deserve it. So how do we actually make that balance? Especially these days, she's not going out that much because of the schools are not like fully open yet, and then she doesn't have anybody to socialize. So she's seeing me the whole majority of the time. So how do I maintain my sanity in the first place? And secondly, how do I redirect her? We have not started Srimad Bhagavatam yet. We are right now doing the Mahabharata. So how do I channelize her activities? How do I keep her occupied throughout so that she does not get into such negative influences, for me at least?
Well, the way we want to teach our children is not that life is picture perfect, because material life is not picture perfect. We have to give them the reality. In other words, life is not just black and white. Life has many, many shades of gray. So when they see us faltering, and they see us not behaving picture perfect, that also is okay for them, because then they learn how to negotiate these things in light of Srimad Bhagavatam's instructions and other scriptures. So that's why it's so important to have that special time with the children where we put things in perspective. And I used to do that. I remember when I would do Srimad Bhagavatam with my children, I would bring up topics like that actually, I said this, and I don't think it was proper. We would actually discuss that, my own weaknesses. So children learn that nobody is perfect in this world. We are trying to be perfect. We are on this path of perfection, but we are not perfect. To see us as human beings, that we are also growing in Krishna consciousness. But we still remain their models, though. You know what I mean? There's also that part where the wonderful process of Krishna consciousness is that, and especially training our children, is that as they are advancing through our help, we are also advancing. We are also growing in Krishna consciousness. You see? So teaching our children is actually pure devotional service, if we see it like that. If we see that these children are servants of God and we are doing our best, but we are not here to give them picture perfect image. That would be actually detrimental for them, because when they go out in the world, they won't see it's not perfect. Even devotees are not perfect. Nothing is perfect. But what a child learns through these imperfections is how to put it in perspective of Krishna consciousness. So you should not be shy away from giving your example, even though you may make a mistake once in a while. But they learn from those mistakes. They're learning from our mistakes. They're learning from their mistakes. And you can openly discuss with them. As an instructor, as a teacher, a humble, a self-realized soul is somebody who has no problems admitting to his faults. He absolutely has no problem explaining to others what his faults are, Narad Muni didn't take any pains to point out Vyasadev's faults, and Vyasadev had no problem admitting to his mistake. You see, so they should see that a truly, a good devotee is somebody who acknowledges his mistakes, and the idea of mistakes, acknowledging, is to learn from them. Life is a process of learning. you should feel fully confident of yourself as a role image, and not feel in any way lacking that. Then only the child will pick up that confidence. You should be proud. You should want your children to be like you, even with your faults. But at the same time, you want to be striving to get better and better and better. Okay. Without that confidence, children won't develop that confidence, you know. Okay. So.
Thank you, Mataji.
Right.
Shamarupini Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you for the wonderful class. Mataji, in regards to the question that Jyoti Mataji asked, so because we are doing nectar of devotion, so somebody asked the same question. So Prabhuji was telling, but we are followers of Rupa Goswami, and in the verse, it comes that only like a service to worship to Krishna is pure devotional service. So how is it that we still, worship other demigods, with pure devotion, and then we still go to a spiritual planet? So that's my...
Yeah, so it's, somebody like Bharat Maharaj can allow the ritualistic sacrifices in his kingdom and still not be deviated, In other words, still he was his Ishtadev, his Lord was Krishna. So worshipping the demigods with pure devotion is you never hear any acharya doing that. They just simply accept them as different limbs of the Lord. They're not worshipping them. At any point, it's not recommended to worship the demigods for a devotee or for and pure devotees. You never hear of them worshipping demigods. But gopis went to Katyani, Mother Katyani, for getting Krishna as their husbands. But they went there temporarily to pray to her, offer her things, and pray to her. It wasn't like day and night their meditation was Mother Durga. Oh, Mother Durga, oh, Mother Durga. No, the meditation was Krishna. So there's no there's no difficulty in this. In other words, pure devotees only worship Krishna, period.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mother.
Sometimes in worldly life, in old times, in Vedic times, kings had to perform these ritualistic sacrifices. Now, in the case of King Prachina Bharishit, he didn't put it, he didn't have the proper consciousness, remember?
Yes.
Yeah. So he suffered. And so therefore Narad Muni had to come. He was in the lineage of Dur Maharaj. He couldn't take the chance of him falling down, you see. Narad Muni ran to him and said, look, I have to teach him this person. And so he gave that wonderful story of Puranjan. So kings who have deviated from that, they've been taught by higher authorities and put, their position was corrected. But we still have to see Lord Shiva as a pure devotee. To disrespect him would be a great offense because he's none other than a pure devotee. So the devotee has that consciousness, that proper understanding, but he doesn't worship Lord Shiva. Yeah. In other words, if you massage the legs, I may have given this example last time, if you massage the legs, it's not like you're offering service to the leg. You're offering service to the owner of the leg. Okay, so in other words, if you need to go to a demigod temple due to certain reasons, you have to have the proper understanding that this service that I'm offering is going to Krishna, the owner of these demigods. And that's a very difficult thing. That's why we recommend not to do it, because the consciousness can be weakened because we are not at that platform. Okay, but these pure devotees were on that platform. They could clearly see, okay.
Okay, yes, thank you, Mataji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. I can.
Hare Krishna.
Hi, Mata. I can ask question, Mataji?
Yes.
Hare Krishna. Mataji, just now sorry, mother. My Saturday also I'm busy because my husband works Saturday also. Therefore, everything, every side doing, and then also try to hear you, mother. Just now here, I read in Chaitanya Charitamrita just now with my kids, because other day I do Bhagavatam, Saturday I do Chaitanya Charitamrita. That before creation and before dissolution, Krishna is always there, right? Creation and dissolution. So a question came in mind that we hear like when the devastation happened till Brahma Loka, Shiva Loka not happen, Mahaloka. So so where the Mahaloka go? What happened to Mahaloka?
Yeah.
Like
So people in Mahaloka, they take an airplane and they go to Brahmaloka at that time because that's where the devastation doesn't affect. That's where they go. That's what I've heard in the Bhagavatam.
Oh,
so
you said from Mahaloka they go Brahmaloka?
Well, to the higher, I'm not sure if Jana Loka and Tapas Loka are destroyed. From what I know, all the planets below Brahma Loka, they are destroyed. Below Satya Loka, which is Brahma's planet, is destroyed. So they have to go to Brahma Loka in order to, not be destroyed. Because these
Brahma Loka don't get destroyed, Mataji?
No. Satya Loka doesn't get destroyed. No.
Okay, so how far destroyed? How far?
Up till Satya Loka, which is Mahar, Jana, and Tapas, and then comes Brahma Loka or Satya Loka. That's what I understand.
Mata, I didn't understand at all. You told Satya, Mahar, and then up you told Brahma Loka. That means Mahar Loka get devastated, but Brahma Loka don't get devastated. That's what.
Because it's higher. It's Brahma's planet. That's the highest. It's the topmost part of the material world. It's in the material world, that's the highest, right? So that doesn't get destroyed.
Mahar Loka is down than Brahma Loka?
Yeah. You remember that chapter that I did last time? When the yogi is moving up and up and up and up, right? So he's going to all the, he's going to different planets. And then he enters Mahaloka, where life is very, very peaceful. And life is very, very long. But then when devastation happens, which happens at the end of Brahma's life, right? After 100 years, which is 16 trillion years, then all these sages, they fly off to Brahmaloka, Satyaloka, in order to be saved from that fire. Okay? And then when the creation again begins, they come down again. They don't stay there. Okay.
So
technical part.
So Mataji, so Brahmaloka, so I understand today that Brahmaloka not get devastated. That's what I understand from you, right?
That's what I understand, yeah.
So till Satyaloka something, I don't know how to, till how long till Satyaloka get devastated? I don't know how long, how far material world go devastated. Till lower than Satyaloka is get devastated and Mahaloka people move to Brahmaloka. That's what you understand, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Mother. And
I mean, it gets devastated, that's partial. Well, we won't get into that technical stuff right now.
Yes.
Maybe separately we can talk about it, but I'm not very expert or anything in this area. It's very, very technical. But these matters will again come in Canto 3. So we can cover it again. It's going to be repeated again in Canto 3, a lot of details. Okay.
And another thing is that Mataji, when the Mohini Murti feeding the nectar, then Mohini Murti feed the demigods, not the demons, because then they will get immortal. So what is the immortal means? Like long age here, right? Not like they're never going to die, not like this, right?
It just means long duration of life.
Long duration.
Which is almost like immortality, but it's not really technical. They have to die.
Okay. And Mata, another thing is that about the connected to the homeschool, Mata, sometimes it's very tough. That means children cooperating with me, I cooperating with them, but sometimes too much going on, too much, and then at the end of the day, when I think all day what I did, and then what I did, sometimes I show temper to my kids, and which I feel so bad. But I don't know what to do, Mother, because sometimes it's like so quick, have to everything like casual is like this. That anything little bit here there happen, then it will be end up. It will be like, like my husband make the casual and I'm the person who follow the casual. And casual is the matter of is like this have to do, that have to do, this have to one after one, one after one, one after one. So I don't know, Mata, what to do on this condition, how to little bit think, sometimes I feel like, oh, why I did this, I shouldn't do that. My kids is okay, but
I just
sometimes
I just mentioned in the last when Archana was asking that question, it's okay to lose your temper. We're not giving them a picture perfect life. So you just have to, maybe there's a day which is very difficult, more difficult than others. So one loses one's cool. So we are humans. So I don't think one needs to be very hard on oneself, and then just try to realize that maybe next time it will be better. So we are not trying to give them, our children, just everything perfect. So I already answered that question. So you try to do your best and try to see where you can make your life a little bit less stressful. And you may have to adjust things in your life, and try to keep working on it. It takes time.
thank you, Mata.
That's all.
Okay, thank you all. We're on dot on time this time. Thank you for your association, all of you, and we'll hear from you again next Saturday with chapter 4. Thank you. Hare Krishna.